Coming live to you tonight from Motel Prius, back in Canungra, this time at the Canungra Showgrounds. About 20 metres away from me is a river, a little creek. So there's a bunch of campers down here on the camp bed, on the riverbed. It's a lovely spot. Nearby is the town of Canungra. I went in there for dinner tonight in the hotel. I got three things that I want to talk about very briefly today. Firstly, tropical storm or hurricane Storm Debbie continues to wreak havoc in northern Florida / the Carolinas. And what I'm hearing from following the narrative is they suspect that the storm is going to move offshore, reform back into a hurricane, and then make another landfall. So, I mean, this could just simply be a storm that sort of sticks around for a while. Right now, it is moving very slowly. It is a very large storm, so it's bringing huge amounts of moisture in from the Gulf and from the Atlantic Ocean and dumping that on the land. So they're starting to see some never before seen record-breaking rain events in that part of America. So huge amounts of economic losses, structural damages, human suffering, environment suffering. I was in Yandina a few weeks ago, and I came across a beekeeping shop. And I went in there and I was chatting with the guy who ran the beekeeping shop, who said it was the largest beekeeping shop in Queensland and possibly the largest in Australia. So he knew a thing or two about bees. And he told me that that the honey production... Okay, one thing he said was that the Sunshine Coast has got one of the highest concentrations of beekeepers in Australia. I mean, partly because it's just good climate for it. There's lots of rain there. It's lots of good soils. There's lots of people. It's close to markets. Brisbane is just down the road. That's a city of 2 or 3 million people. So lots of market for the product. He said, however, that the honey production had decreased this year because it had been a very wet year. And I said, well, how does having a really wet year actually interfere with honey production? I mean, I guess maybe all the rain, the bees just don't want to go out when it's raining, or maybe. He says that the extreme rain washes the nectar out of the trees. So just thinking about that, right? So we think about an extreme weather event such as that's taken place in America right now, and we tend to think about the economic damages to the flow of trade, to the infrastructure that's damaged, which reduces the flow of trade, economics, the damage to people's homes, the money that needs to be paid out in insurance, all of the human woe. But we've got to remember also there's these ecological systems that are being impacted by these extreme weather events, okay? Now, obviously a lot more than just the honeybees, because, there's a lot more going on in the forests and the ecosystems and the rivers, which are now just getting scoured out by this massive rain event. Remember also that every time that there's a big rain event, all of the plastic trash that's lying around on the streets in our urban areas gets flushed out. There was a big rain event in this part of the world, just south of here, northern New South Wales, I think 2 years ago. Big rains flooded the bejesus out of a town called Lismore. Lots and lots of water went down. And I was talking to some people that were involved in mangrove management down on the Clarence River, is it, down there? Through Ballina? Is that the Ballina River? Clarence River or something? Anyway, the river that runs through Ballina. And they were saying that massive amount of rain had actually scoured out and cleaned all the plastic trash that had previously accumulated in the mangroves. So on one hand, it's like, great, the heavy weather has gone and cleaned the plastic trash out of the mangroves, but what did it do with it? It flushed it out into the sea. So, and this is the concern, that there's a name given to this. It's called environmental surprise. An environmental surprise is when you get one extreme event exacerbates another extreme event. There was an example of an example of that, or a big one. It was in Honduras or somewhere in in Central America, and a hurricane had come over the peninsula, dumped massive amounts of rain, went out, was sort of been into the Pacific, and then came back again. This was maybe 10 years ago, and it was basically 2 weeks of intense rain, and which is one thing, okay, but because there'd been so much deforestation in the place, that massive amount of rain hit these deforested hills, and there was just these huge landslides and this massive movement of soil and stuff, and they lost like quarter of their agricultural areas or something. Like, so you got this combination of environmental factors, because everything is so vulnerable on the planet. Every ecosystem is pressured. Every urban area is full of plastic trash. There's so much. It's not just one thing. There's all of this stuff. It's like dominoes. And this is so important. This is why the whole movement around Vita Sapien is about trying to get as many people as possible to get their head around this stuff and to start finding solutions, right? We need more soldiers, right, in the environmental movement, and each soldier needs to be smarter. That's the game that I'm playing through the Vita Sapien brand. Okay, that's Debbie. Second thing, a lot of my news feed and a lot of my thinking, or researching and just trying to intuit what's going on in the world, is around this potential strike from Iran against Israel. Something's coming, and I'm not going to speculate what it is, but there's a lot of tension in that region as well, in the same way that every ecosystem is stressed on the planet right now in the Middle East. Every political system is stressed, and whatever Iran does by way of responding to Israel's actions, I've got a side in this actually, but I'm not going to disclose it. I'm going to try and keep this apolitical. Could potentially kick off a much larger regional war. Okay, there's 2 American aircraft battle groups in there. I was just listening to an article. They were saying that I think it was 2003 or 2000 and something, when the last time Hezbollah and Israel went for each other, that Hezbollah had fired 3,000 rockets during that exchange, whereas they can now actually potentially fire 3,000 rockets a day consistently, day after day. So the whole system is primed. Now, what's that got to do with Vita Planeta? Well, I tell you what, mate, war is a very, very bad thing for ecosystems, right? Quite apart from anything else, all of the trillions of dollars that are spent on weapons that could otherwise be spent on environmental rehabilitation, just frame it that way. And secondly, every time a bomb goes off, there's a whole ecological footprint associated with producing the bomb, and then a pollution event when the bomb actually goes off. We just saw Israel go and take out a whole bunch of an oil tank farm in Yemen, and I'm just looking at, and that was a big. I don't know if you just go and Google the images of that. They took out the whole oil tank farm. This massive ocean of burning bright orange flames and thick black smoke. Now, all of that oil was going to end up getting burnt through internal combustion engines anyway, but when it's burnt in a high temperature, then the actual combustion byproducts are relatively non-toxic, CO2 obviously, but when you burn it at those lower temperatures where you get that thick black smoke, that is a lot of really, really nasty, like benzenes and toluene and all these nasty chemicals that come out of that smoke, which is contributing to the annihilation of insect populations and contaminating the land and the soil. All right, so war, like industry, is bad for the ecosystem the way it's conducted today, and war as a subset of industry is even worse again, right? And that's not even going down into the harm to human populations. So if there is a major regional war, there is a major ecological footprint coming to an extremely stressed planet and a particularly environmentally stressed region. Okay, so there's that. Right, okay, on some good news, if you can call it good news. Something that I listened to the other day, two of my most favoritist smart people on the planet had an interview together. Okay, so Johan Rockstrom is the director of the Potsdam Institute, a world-leading expert in planetary boundaries, which are integral to the work we do in Vita Sapien, and also the Anthropocene. All right, so he's in an interview with Nate Hagens. If you haven't heard of Nate Hagens, you should check him out. So Nate Hagens wrote a paper that coined the phrase the superorganism to describe humanity. 8 billion human beings behaving in the manner of a single organism that is motivated by 2 or 3 very simple motivators is creating the chaos we're seeing on the planet. So Nate Hagens has got sort of an institution, and he's got this concept called the Great Simplification. The Great Simplification is this idea that we're going into a period of energy stress, where resources are going to be a lot harder to find. This is sort of like collapse light, if you like. So the Great Simplification is his conception for the future, and he has a interview series where he interviews some of the really smartest people in the world in a whole spectrum of different fields. And he does these 1.5 hour interviews, and they're very good big brain stuff. If you want to do Vita Sapien, the Sapien part, Nate Hagens' YouTube channel, look for the playlist called The Great Simplification. There's probably, I think he's got nearly 100 interviews. I've probably listened to 20 of them. He's got interviews with Guy talking about the insect apocalypse. He's got an interview with Kate Raworth on donut economics. He's got interviews with a guy talking about social media and how that functions. That's pretty scary. He's got this guy comes on who knows everything about the whole oil production process and the cracking plants and where all of the different fractions of the oil goes. He's got another guy that comes on that talks about nuclear weapons. Fascinating if you're into nukes. I'm into nukes. All right, Nate Hagens, The Great Simplification. I'm going to play 1 minute audio, which is the opening sequence of his interview with Johan Rockstrom from the Potsdam Institute. And again, Johan Rockstrom was one of my scientific heroes. If I was a kid in a bedroom, I'd have a poster of Johan Rockstrom on my wall. Right, so listen to this. Actually, I don't know whether you're going to be able to hear this because of the way that Anyway, if it doesn't work, I'll edit it out.
We're deep in the climate crisis. We're deep in the red on the climate boundary. But what the planetary boundary science shows clearly is that even if we were successful in phasing out fossil fuels, we would still breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius boundary if we do not come back into the safe space on the biosphere boundaries. There's so few people who really recognize that 30% of the carbon dioxide that we emit from fossil fuel burning is actually absorbed by intact nature on land. It's thanks to the biodiversity and the intact forest systems in particular that are buffering this. And if you don't have a healthy planet, that capacity of buffering that stress is reduced. So my fear is that we're shooting ourselves in the foot by emitting greenhouse gases and causing the climate crisis, and at the same time making the planet in her weakest state to deal with that crisis.
All right, I don't know if you got that. Okay, one more thing. Yesterday I was doing some research and reading. So back to this idea that a couple of days ago I conceived the idea of actually 2 new quests, Vita Sapien quests, formerly known as canons of conduct, later referred to as practices, now referred to as quests. One of those was called Visit the Dam, and Visit the Dam is an invocation to get present to the planetary boundaries. Okay, you want to get present to planetary boundaries, just remember the name Johan Rockstrom, the Stockholm Resilience Center. That's where a lot of the planetary boundaries research came from, and Johan was one of the lead authors. Okay, the other practice quest, Vita Sapien quest, was called Watch the Storm, and Watch the Storm is an invocation to get present to extreme weather events. Okay, and so in pursuing these quests myself, I downloaded some YouTubes and watched some YouTubes about hurricane formation, which is just fascinating in itself. It's just a totally fascinating subject. with the low pressure system and the water, hot air rising, the convection, and then the low shear, so that the winds at the ground level are the kind of consistent with the winds at the top, and the eye wall, of course, which is the the wall of cloud on the inside of the eye, and this whole concept around eye wall replacement. So one of the things you see if you follow hurricanes, all right, if you follow hurricanes, typhoons, and tropical cyclones, which are all exactly the same thing, tropical revolving storms, albeit in different parts of the world, they've all got the same physics. And so once you get your head around the physics, if you hear of these things forming and you just start Googling around, you'll find that there's a whole bunch of services that track them, and there's people that analyze them, and sometimes they fly planes through them, and you get data coming out, and there's all of this narrative. There's a lot of discussion around these weather systems, particularly the ones that are particularly large. Like, you could spend days following these weather systems, right? Anyway, that's the invocation, is to understand how these big weather systems function. So I did a bit of that the other day, and I'm schooling myself up on eye wall replacement in tropical revolving storms. Fascinating stuff. Indeed it is. All right, that's enough for today. See you tomorrow.